Congressman Ryan.
Yes, sir.
Congratulations yet again. This is your 6th or 7th?
Ninth.
Ninth. Your ninth time around. What does it feel like, even after all that experience?
It's the kind of transfer of power to another political party, and it just shows that this democracy is alive. It's always changing, it's always shifting, and in a moment like we're in now, that's a good thing. You think, well, we can feel really bad about where the country is right now, but we know it's always changing, and so what can we do to make that change happen for the better?
And with this political shift in power, it's only in half of the Congress. How would you define, this is a generic question that I'll ask everyone, how would you define success for the next 2 years?
Well, the bar's low, so get the government up and running, funded, and I hope that there's some move towards really understanding and trying to address the challenges that we face right now. I mean, it's getting lost in the 24-hour news cycle. It's getting lost with the behavior of the president and everything that comes with him. The competition against China, the healthcare issues that we have, the opiate epidemic, the pensions that are still being lost, and the wages that are still stagnant for most American families who can barely keep their nose above water. We've got to start making that front and center. And I worry that China has a 5-year plan, a 20-year plan, a 50-year plan, a 100-year plan, and we're in a 24-hour news cycle. And I hope that this Congress, at least the Democrats, even if things don't pass the Senate and go on to get signed, that we could start educating the American people about what we want to do to address these big challenges, and at least let them see us try to function in a responsible way. And I'm not optimistic that we're going to get a lot of legislation, significant legislation through. We should try. But I hope we can start to shift away from where we are now to where we need to be.
You mentioned China. I know back in 2010 you introduced a bill to deal with China's manipulation of currency and supported tariffs. Big favorite initiative from President Trump. How do you feel, how do you react to the way he's handling it?
Well, it's a tactical move with no long-term strategy. I mean, that's really the issue. I mean, it's on one day, it's off the next day. It's on one day, it's off the next day. What's the purpose? And I believe if we have a larger strategy that I know the military has, Secretary Mattis actually has the military is the only part of our government that has a long-term strategy against China, and then elements and tactics along the way. And I think that tariffs are appropriate for China. If they are cheating, they would dump steel all the time to where the cost of the steel coming in was the same cost as an American steel company's raw material cost. So before the American company even flips the lights on to run their steel mill and buys the materials, they're already more expensive than the dumped Chinese steel. That's wrong. So we have a responsibility to level that playing field. But what's the rest of the plan? Where's the education? Where's the healthcare investments? Where's the investments in the research and development, into AI, into additive manufacturing, wind, solar, on and on and on, space, directed energy? I mean, we can go on. Like, why aren't we investing in these things so we can compete with China? So just to have, like, we're going to put on tariffs so you can come to the Midwest and say, hey, I'm the guy who tried to slap China around and look like a tough guy. What's the plan? You know?
And that particularly affects your district, yeah? I mean, with manufacturing being low, Youngstown, my wife's mom, my mother-in-law, who we love dearly, was from Youngstown.
Oh, wow.
We were there to bury her a couple of years ago. And the town looks tough. It looks like tough times.
Yeah.
This policy and others are going to affect whether jobs come back. I know I was just overhearing a conversation. GM has left Youngstown, one of the factories they closed.
Yeah.
What's the agenda? How do we, first of all, start talking to voters to recognize the Democrats are on their side, on the side of the working man, on the side of labor and manufacturing? And how do you begin to get that given the obstacles that you face, to get jobs back to your district?
It's got to be a whole of government approach. I mean, again, China has a whole of government. Their military, their economic system, their educational system, their infrastructure investments, their research and development, all their soft power that they use, all is moving in a comprehensive plan to bolster China's economy and power in the world. We don't have that. And so if you're going to plug a Youngstown, Ohio back in, it's going to take a comprehensive plan. I mean, you need to clean the blight up. You need to make sure it has broadband. You have to make sure that you're investing in the schools and paying teachers and having research and development happening at universities. But it's not just Youngstown. It's Gary, Indiana. You know, it's Buffalo. It's Toledo. It's Steubenville. It's the towns down in the southern part of the country. And so we've got two kind of economies happening here. We've got the really wealthy that are doing really well, and they get better health care and better technology, and they live in safer communities. And then we have the rest, which is not 50-50. It's like, 10 or 20% versus 80%. And I think we need a robust national agenda that says all of these communities that have been left behind by globalization, that are getting further buried by automation, we have to plug these communities back into the global economy. You hear the economists talk, they say, well, globalization works, trade works in the aggregate. That's great in the aggregate, and it does. I've taken those classes. I know I can read, and it does work, it does create wealth, but it's not shared wealth. That's where the government has a responsibility to come in and have policies that plug these communities in, that make investments. And just as an aside that really is a big part of this, it's not just the government. Private investment doesn't come to these areas because the government hasn't kind of tilled the soil to allow the seeds to be planted. So 80% of venture capital, which is a lot in the United States, but 80% of it goes to 3 states, California, Massachusetts, and New York. 9% of it goes to women, and less than 1% goes to African Americans. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
Because the default position is, let's be socialists. It's like, well, no, how about we get a conscious capitalistic system to work where we're getting this. I want private companies to come to Youngstown and hire people. I don't want everybody with a government job. I want more for them, and I want the private sector to come in and jazz up towns like Youngstown. And so that's a whole of government plan that includes the tax code and everything else I mentioned.
Part of the issue of joblessness is the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
They're certainly connected.
Yeah.
You're on a caucus that deals with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address that? I know there's a good friend of mine who runs Justice for Vets, which is alternative courts that takes vets with nonviolent crimes and creates an alternative court system so that they're brought back into the community, do community service and get rehab and so on. Part of the issue is the criminal justice system, I would think, where mandatory sentencing has put people into the cycle.
Yeah.
But overall, how do you address the issue of the opioid crisis and addiction?
It's the same kind of thing, whole of government. You need resources on the front end with prevention. I think we need to teach things in the schools. A lot of these people aren't connected. They're not connected to a family. They're not connected to work. They're not connected to their community. There's a real disconnect. So in our schools, I promote something called social and emotional learning, which is a big part of, I think, the future of education, where you get kids connected to each other. So I think it starts there with prevention. And then it leads to law enforcement, where you need to make sure that our first responders have Narcan and the kind of things that will save lives. And then you need things like drug courts and vet courts, where you're not getting thrown into prison, you're going to rehabilitation. And then you need that to be paid for, too. One of the big problems with like the Medicaid program is they'll pay, in many states, they'll pay for a 30-day rehab. Well, these opiates, these are fentanyl, carfentanil, these things are so strong. A 30-day traditional for maybe alcohol rehab, it's not anywhere near what you need.
It's one of the great things that I think that Governor Kasich did was extend Medicaid to deal with extended funds for rehab and such things, correct?
Yeah.
Was
Yeah,
that something that?
he expanded the Medicaid program, so we have more people covered through the Affordable Care Act, through Obamacare, and he was one of the few Republican governors who did that, to his credit. But the rehab that gets paid for is only 30 days.
Right.
And,
even still.
Even
I
still.
gotcha.
And these people need at least 3 to 4 months, because what happens is 30 days, and you talk to the cops, you talk to the parole officers.
We know, yeah.
Right, so they go back in now, and this is where taxpayers, I think, get really frustrated. It's like, we'll pay for them to go to a 30-day treatment 5 different times.
Right.
And never get better.
Right.
Instead of saying, why don't we pay one time for 3 months or 4 months and get them back
and
into
the alternative
workforce.
court system is recidivism rate is so low. It's fantastic. And just one more question.
Yeah.
I know you challenged Speaker Pelosi in the past. Your impressions of her right now?
She is one of the best inside legislative players there is. I mean, just knows the buttons to push, knows the levers of government to pull. You know, and that's her great strength, and I think that's something that we're going to try to take advantage of here in the next few weeks.
Fantastic. And you're pleased that she's Speaker right now?
Well, it beats Republicans.
It beats Republicans. That begs so many more questions, but we have to run.
Yeah.
Pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
Continue
Thanks.
the good work. And
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thank you for having us.
Yeah, stay in touch.